Have you ever wondered why some men only begin to spiral once a woman no longer waits? When her back finally turns, not in fury, not in tears, but in silence and stillness, in sovereignty. This isn't the story of rage or revenge. This is the slow unraveling of a tether once held tight by illusion. The archetype is not the damsel, not the pleaser, not the one clinging to validation. She has died. What rises in her place is the woman who has integrated her shadow and fed herself from within. To the man who once basked in her attention, it begins as a disturbance, a whisper in the mind, a subtle shift in her gaze, in her tone. He will tell himself she's just busy, that it's temporary. But something deeper stirs, something ancient and unspoken, the loss of control. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist persists," and so begins the haunting. Not of her body, but of her absence. You see, the woman who no longer needs him becomes, paradoxically, more present in his psyche than ever before. Her withdrawal creates a vacuum of space the masculine ego cannot bear. She is no longer a mirror for his worth, no longer a stage for his projections, and so the mind begins to turn in on itself. Men, especially those uninitiated in their own inner work, often define themselves by conquest, admiration, pursuit. They are built socially and psychologically to anchor their identity in what they can protect, dominate, or possess. But when faced with a woman who is whole unto herself, their ego is robbed of its primary food source. Power overdotted is here in this crucible that his mind becomes restless. Not because she is gone, but because he cannot place himself in her story anymore. She is no longer reacting, no longer explaining, no longer trying to prove she is enough. She has moved beyond the archetype of the maiden. She has become the queen in exile, unreachable, not in distance, but in depth, and the deeper truth. She never truly needed him, but her conditioning did. Her wounded inner child, her trauma-driven craving for affection, the desire to be chosen, that was the need he met. Now that she has stepped into individuation, into the full embodiment of her feminine essence, she no longer needs to be chosen. She chooses herself and the silence. It is not empty. It is filled with the sound of her return to herself, the rituals of healing, the prayers whispered into pillows, the fire lit beneath the surface of her once gentle heart. It is in that silence that he will hear the echoes of every moment she dimmed her light to keep him comfortable. Every laugh she forced, every boundary she bent, every "it's okay" that meant "it's killing me." He will remember, not because she reminds him, but because the feminine has always been memory itself, mystical, embedded in the bones. And the man who is not ready for her wholeness will be haunted by the version of her he met before she knew her worth. Because that version no longer exists. She will never explain her absence. She will never correct his fantasies. She will never return to clarify the story. Because women who have tasted self-belonging know asterisk closure is an inside job. And so he begins the descent, not into madness, but into the mirror. Without her, he is left alone with his projections. The stories he wrote about who she was, the myths he crafted around her devotion. Now, stripped of her gaze, he must face the raw question, was she ever who I thought she was? Or was she simply a canvas I painted on to soothe my own shadows? Carl Jung taught us that we do not see others as they are, we see them as we are. Her departure removes the veil. What remains is not just her absence, but the confronting silence of his own internal void. She no longer dances for his approval, and suddenly the music in his mind begins to fracture. This is the beginning of his reckoning. You see, when a woman releases the need to be wanted, she accesses something far more magnetic, the power of not asking, not needing, not chasing. She becomes the embodiment of divine withdrawal. She does not punish. She disengages, and in that disengagement, she becomes unforgettable. Men do not obsess over women who are available, pleading, present at every call. They become consumed by the one who vanished into herself. The masculine psyche, shaped through centuries of pursuit, does not know how to respond to a woman who retreats inward without a trace of blame. This is no tantrum, no test op, this is transcendence. But here lies the paradox. Her evolution becomes his initiation. If he dares, if he does not turn bitter or cast blame, he will begin to confront what she once reflected, his own lack of inner grounding, his detachment from the feminine within. Her silence becomes a sacred echo, challenging him to meet his own anima, to stop chasing the external woman and begin courting the internal one, the feminine principle he abandoned long ago. In her absence, he must now face the emotional immaturity he once disguised as detachment, the insecurity he masked with dominance, the fear he cloaked in silence. She has become a mirror he can no longer touch, but still feels. And if he chooses the path of depth, of soul work, of genuine transformation, then perhaps one day he will meet her again. Not in the past, not in longing, but in mutual wholeness. Yet she will not wait. That is the essence of feminine power. It does not linger in doorways. It opens. It blesses. It vanishes. Because a woman who has integrated her shadows, who has felt the weight of abandonment, and chosen to become her own home, she no longer clings to anyone who does not stay freely. And so he turns at night, thinking, replaying, wondering where she went. But she is not gone. She is reborn, somewhere beyond his reach, beyond the stories he told, beyond the need to be seen through his eyes. And the mind of a man, once starved of her attention, will wander the halls of memory, searching for the moment she slipped through his fingers softly, silently, without ceremony. Because a woman like that doesn't need to slam the door. She becomes the door, and it closes with grace. Now, the stillness she left behind becomes his greatest torment, not because of drama, not because of conflict, but because of how completely she departed without needing to explain. Her exit was not reactive, it was resolved. That's what unsettles him most. He thought she'd always be there, waiting, hoping, reaching for scraps of affection. He mistook her patience for permanence, her softness for weakness. But what he failed to understand was this: a woman does not leave when she is angry. She leaves when she is finally at peace with never being chosen. This peace is not passive. It is forged in fire. Through every silent night she cried beside someone who never noticed. Through every time she shrank herself so he wouldn't feel small. Through every wound she tried to carry alone, hoping love would be enough. But love, unreciprocated, becomes burden, and no soul can carry both love and abandonment for long. Jung once described individuation as the process of becoming whole, not through addition, but through release. She released the illusions. She burned the false hopes. She let die the fantasy that she could ever fix a man unwilling to meet her where she stands. And when she let that version of him go, something miraculous happened. She saw herself not through his eyes, but through her own. No longer filtered by scarcity or the desperation to be worthy. Her self-perception shifted. She no longer saw a woman waiting. She saw a woman rising. A woman whose love could fill oceans, but who finally understood the wrong man will drown in her depth and blame the water. That understanding is irreversible. And while he begins to romanticize her memory, idolizing the very presence he once took for granted, she is somewhere else now. Not with another man, perhaps, but with herself. In her solitude, in her rituals, in her reclamation. Because once a woman finds herself again, she doesn't need to punish anyone. Her absence does the speaking. The feminine, when healed, does. Not beg, It withdraws into sacred quiet to the unawakened man. This quiet is unbearable. His mind becomes a theater of what-ifs. He replays conversations, searches for signs, tries to decode the shift, but he won't find it in logic. Because it wasn't a decision. It was a transformation. She became untouchable, not in body, but an energy. And here's the great irony. The man who could not meet her emotional needs will now feel her energetic absence more deeply than he ever felt her physical presence, because men rarely grieve the woman, they grieve the mirror, the part of themselves they abandoned, the softness they suppressed, the warmth they were too afraid to hold. And she, the woman he once thought would never leave, has become the embodiment of that lost softness. But she will not return to soften his world again. She has new temples to build, inner landscapes to tend, new ways of loving that do not require her to disappear in order to be seen, because she finally knows her value is not in what she gives away, but in what she chooses to protect. And the man who only saw her light when it began to fade will now chase shadows his own. In the aftermath, he may try to reach for her, not with flowers or grand apologies, but with confusion, with regret, with the aching echo of what he never truly held. He may send words that once would have shattered her resolve. Are you okay? I've been thinking about you. I miss what we had. But the woman who has risen from shadow no longer clings to crumbs. She no longer needs to be remembered to feel real. She no longer aches to be understood by the very person who misunderstood her the most. Her silence now is not a strategy. It is a sanctuary. And while he hopes to return to the chapter he left half-written, he finds the book closed its pages, no longer waiting for his touch, because she has become the author of her own story, and in her new language, he no longer appears. You see, Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine aspect within every man, so often repressed, projected, or feared. What he mourns is not just her, but the connection to that sacred feminine within himself. Her departure did not just end a relationship. It collapsed a bridge between who he is and who he could have become. And without her, he cannot walk that path. Not yet. He must now sit with his shame, his avoidance, his refusal to meet her where she stood open, vulnerable, asking not for perfection, but for presence. She once offered him the key to his own evolution. He left it resting in her hands. Now, as he stares at a door that no longer opens, he is forced to face himself without distraction, without rescue, without the glow of her devotion softening the reflection. And this is where the inner world begins to quake. No man remains unchanged after being loved by a woman who has done her shadow work, because her love is not just affectionate, is alchemy. It exposes, it reveals, it burns illusions to ash. And when that kind of love is gone, the absence is not silence. It is revelation. He must decide now. Will he numb it with noise, with others, with the pretense of moving on? Or will he descend into the underworld of his psyche and confront the places where her love could not reach? Because if he truly wishes to understand why she left, he must first ask, why did I need her to stay small just to feel big? This question is a fire, and it spares no ego, but it is also the beginning of transformation if he dares to enter. Meanwhile, she does not wait. She does not check his updates, nor hope for his growth. She is too busy growing herself, watering the parts of her soul that once withered under the weight of being misunderstood, dancing in spaces where her softness is celebrated, not consumed, building a life that doesn't shrink to fit into anyone's narrative, because the woman who no longer needs him no longer needs anyone. Not from bitterness, but from rebirth. While he circles the edges of memory, trying to resurrect what was never truly seen, she is already living what she once begged for, a life where love does not cost her herself. Now he drifts through days with a quiet longing he cannot quite name. Her presence lingers, not in her return, but in how thoroughly she is gone, not blocked, not erased, just absent in the most soul-wrenching way. She is no longer accessible, not even in imagination, because the version of her that once needed him, the one who reached out when he pulled away, who softened when he hardened, who whispered in the space where he stayed silent, that woman no longer exists. This is not punishment. This is transformation. Carl Jung reminded us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And this man, now tormented by what slipped from his grasp, begins to realize it was not fate that pulled her away. It was every moment he failed to see her, every time she spoke softly and he ignored the tremble in her voice, every boundary she set that he brushed aside with charm or silence, every time she made space for his chaos while silencing her own storm. She did not leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she finally started loving herself, and now he watches her from afar, perhaps not in person, but in spirit. He feels the shift. He sees her light, not dimmed for comfort, but blazing in its full brilliance. She laughs now with her whole body. She walks without seeking. She no longer bends for belonging. She has become her own center of gravity. And that, to a man who never truly met her soul, is terrifying, because he knows, consciously or not, that he could never return to her as he was. That the door to who she used to be has closed forever, and the only way through now is within himself. But not all men walk that path. Some will distract, some will deny. Some will chase others, seeking her in mirrored eyes and half-formed smiles. But nothing compares to the woman who walked away without rage, the woman who left without slamming the door. The one who simply chose peace, because peace, once chosen, cannot be revoked for chaos. And still, in the quiet corners of his mind, her image flickers, not as an object to possess, but as a force he could not contain. The feminine is not something to own. It is something to revere and reverence. He never learned. Now, his restlessness becomes his teacher. His mind, once so certain, becomes a maze of reflection. He begins to ask questions he never had the courage to ask before. Why did I fear her softness? Why did I resist her love? Why did I need her to earn what should have been freely given? Each question is a door deeper into the soul. Each answer, a step toward healing. But she will not be there waiting at the end of that path, because a woman like her does not orbit any man's awakening. She is the awakening. And once the lesson is learned, she is gone, having already become the woman who no longer seeks, no longer pleads, no longer waits, the woman who has returned to herself. And now comes the stillest truth of all. She no longer thinks of him, not with longing, not with regret, not with anger, because the woman who has risen through shadow no longer carries the weight of being misunderstood. She has laid it down like an old garment, no longer fit for the body she inhabits. She is no longer defined by what she survived, but by what she claimed afterward. Her silence is not empty, it is sovereign. It holds prayers and poetry and power. She wakes each morning without wondering if he's changed. She dances without needing to be watched. She speaks without shrinking. Because the woman who no longer needs him has remembered who she was before the world told her to be small. And while he replays the moments he failed to see, her trembling hope, her quiet resilience, her slow unraveling, she builds altars of becoming. Not of worship to any man, but of reverence for her own rebirth. This is the process Jung called individuation, the becoming of the self. Not a version that fits the mold of another's desire, but the wholeness that rises when one is no longer bound by old stories, She has become her own myth. He may call it coldness. He may call it pride. He may say she changed, and he would be right. But what he doesn't understand is she didn't change to hurt him. She changed because staying the same was hurting her, and now she no longer lives for potential. She lives for resonance. She does not ask, will he choose me? But instead, does this align with who I've become? And the answer so often now is no. She does not carry bitterness. That would still make her a prisoner. No, she carries wisdom. The kind earned in silence. The kind carved through loneliness. The kind sung by women who know the difference between being needed and being honored. So when he remembers her, as he will again and again, it will not be her beauty that haunts him. Not her laughter, not even her love. It will be her absence. The sacred, echoing stillness where his name no longer lives. And perhaps one day he will thank her. Not in words, but in the work. In the way he finally meets his own shadow. In the way he learns to hold space for depth. In the way he no longer sees love as a prize, but as a place to arrive whole. But by then, she will be far away. Not in distance, but in frequency. A woman no longer waiting to be chosen because she now chooses her life, her peace, her power. And the man who once believed she would always be there will come to understand this. The woman who knows her worth does not chase. She chooses, the woman who left without slamming the door. The one who simply chose peace, because peace, once chosen, cannot be revoked for chaos. And still, in the quiet corners of his mind, her image flickers. Not as an object to possess, but as a force he could not contain. The feminine is not something to own. It is something to revere. And reverence he never learned. Now his restlessness becomes his teacher. His mind, once so certain, becomes a maze of reflection. He begins to ask questions he never had the courage to ask before. Why did I fear her softness? Why did I resist her love? Why did I need her to earn what should have been freely given? Each question is a door deeper into the soul. Each answer a step toward healing. But she will not be there waiting at the end of that path, because a woman like her does not orbit any man's awakening. She is the awakening. And once the lesson is learned, she is gone, having already become the woman who no longer seeks, no longer pleads, no longer waits, the woman who has returned to herself.